Shalom, y'all, and welcome to Sound the Shofar, the quest for biblical truth. I'm your host, Spencer Bolduc, and today is a special occasion. Today is my first guest interview. That's why I'm dressed up. So, my guest today is Paul Tokgozoglu. He is the host of the Beyond Homo Sapien podcast. On there, he talks about human evolution and how advancing technologies integrate with our human reality. You'll find that Paul and we disagree on a whole lot. But one thing that we both definitely love is Jiu-Jitsu. So we'll be using Jiu-Jitsu as a centerpiece for our conversation on truth. So without further ado, it's time to sound the shofar. Welcome, Paul. How's it going, man?
It's going great. Thanks for having me, Spencer. It's good to see you. You look very fancy, and I'm very excited to be here on this very special day.
Oh, man. For those that are going to be on the podcast, like not watching the video, I am wearing my best and finest jiu-jitsu attire.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. We've got a suit and tie. Well, no, we don't have the jacket on, but we got everything else. We got
I'll work on the jacket.
We got the sweater jacket. That's more than enough. That's badass.
Tonight's no gi for jiu-jitsu, so.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you've been able to train. That's fantastic because I know that a lot of schools have been going through some hard times. I'm really glad that you've been able to train locally. That's good news to see that people are able to start kind of reopening to some extent.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So for those that don't know, actually, let's take a step back.
Yeah, please.
Do you remember how you and I met?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So, how was that?
I sure do.
It was on the test.
It was on the jiu-jitsu mats. And you showed up at the Bomb Holder Jiu-Jitsu Club, at the mats at the old gym that we used to hang out with when we were both in the army, in Germany, Baumholder, Germany, middle of nowhere, redneck Germany, basically. And they had some mats for jiu-jitsu or wrestling that we could use inside of the gym. So we decided to set that up, and somehow you and I got in contact or something. I think I might have just showed up actually, and then you were there and you were teaching, and then we rolled and we became buddies, and then you offered to take me and my ex-wife to the Ramstein Jiu-Jitsu Club, which was like 45 minutes away because we didn't have a car at the time. And we went there and we got to know each other and we ate some fast food at Ramstein Air Force Base.
That's right.
And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah. So I think the first time you had come in contact with maybe Brian Money.
No, Brian wasn't there at the time. I think it was Joe. I think I got in touch with Purple Belt Joe. Okay,
as I remember, sometime where we got to meet. And so some of my friends, family, audience, they don't know what jiu-jitsu is. Oh my gosh. What is jiu-jitsu?
Oof. Jiu-jitsu, it's a grappling martial art, very similar to wrestling or judo in a sense. It looks a lot like what you see. What I often tell people is imagine what you see in the UFC, but minus the punching and kicking and the elbow strikes and stuff like that. So, and then people are like, oh, okay, gotcha. Like it's kind of like the ground element, but you start standing, and there certainly is a lot of standing moves like takedowns and throws and trips and different ways to wrestle people to the ground. But it's mostly focused on joint locks, chokes, ankle attacks, knee attacks, like the joint manipulation kind of stuff, and controlling people, and stuff like that without using punches or kicks. However, in some of the more self-defense oriented aspects of jiu-jitsu, like Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, which is where I started in, under Pedro Sauer, they do emphasize kicking and self-defense and punch blocks and punch defense and stuff with weapons and all that kind of stuff. So that all does certainly exist within the curriculums of jiu-jitsu, but that's more like the self-defense side. And these days, there's a huge sport element of jiu-jitsu that Spencer and I kind of have connected on, which is a lot more fancy, a lot more crazy sometimes, with some fancy ass moves that you can pull out of your hat like magic. But nothing, but oftentimes those same moves might not work in a street fight. So then there is still that element of self-defense jiu-jitsu, which is important to practice. So there's my spiel. Is there anything you can add?
That's a pretty good explanation.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's difficult to describe such a complicated physical sport.
Yeah.
You know, because like, how do you explain a joint lock for someone who doesn't have a clue how that's possible? Yeah. So when did you start jiu-jitsu?
Man, well, I started first with judo when I was 7. My dad is a judo black belt, and he started when he was a kid, back when he lived in Turkey, where he grew up. And then when he came to America, he kept training in judo, and he got his black belt. And then when I was 7, he took me to my first ever judo classes, and I went for like a couple of weeks. Then we stopped going for some reason. I forget. I think it was like too far a drive or something. But then when I was a little bit older, like 15, I got back into judo for a couple of years. But then I stopped doing it because I was lazy, to be, to put it simply. And then I got back into it when I was like 19 because I wanted to lose some weight. And I've been training kind of off and on ever since. And now it's about almost 10 years later. And I'm a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a brown belt in judo. But I kind of switched more to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when I graduated college, when I was like 22. So that was 6 years ago. I kind of stopped training judo because judo is really hard on your body. And I just started really connecting more with jiu-jitsu. I just like the style better. I like the rules a lot better for competition. I wasn't passionate about judo competition, but jiu-jitsu competition is always a lot of fun. I like the rule set for jiu-jitsu. And I like that jiu-jitsu incorporates punching and kicking and self-defense stuff to a more degree than judo. So I've really been just doing jiu-jitsu for like 6 years now. And that's how I met you. That's how I met a lot of people. I used to do a jiu-jitsu podcast. So that's kind of also how I got started with entrepreneurship. The podcast I do now, Beyond Homo Sapien, is about a lot more than just jiu-jitsu. It's about, the future of the species and kind of how to make sense of this crazy world and human evolution, really, the future, essentially. And that includes jiu-jitsu in my opinion, in my experience. So, which is, when I was trying to think about like, when do I want to start having interviews, and, it's kind of been an interesting process as I've thought through my own podcasts, and, I thought it'd be good, especially a conversation between me and you, because we do think so differently. But at the same time, we have this passion for jiu-jitsu that I think that we've brought into our understanding of truth, and is why ultimately why I wanted to have this conversation with you. Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, I think it's important. It's like a basis, a foundation of personal and ultimately spiritual development. So if we're talking about evolution, what I'm talking about there is more about internal evolution, not necessarily Darwinian evolution. I'm talking about something at a much grander scale, cosmic, spiritual, mind, body, soul, essentially, that kind of thing. Look at us, what's happening. Some
different definitions of evolution.
Look at what's happening now. Where are you at? You're in Austin, Texas, right?
No. Now I'm in Alabama.
Oh, you're in Alabama. Oh, sweet. Yeah. That's close. That's
a
little bit closer to me. Sweet. So, I'm in Missouri, but we're about probably 10 hours away from each other, having this conversation about personal spiritual development. It's going to be on the internet for anyone to watch anywhere. to expand their minds, to grow their way of thinking, to whatever, learn about whatever we end up talking about. And that can be consumed by anyone who has access to the internet. And that's just one of countless examples of how our species has kind of evolved and moved forward into a new paradigm. And I just argue on the show that where we're at right now is so different from where our caveman ancestors were at. You can't exactly call us the same species. It wasn't exactly a biological evolution, but it's been an evolution in consciousness. And I think that what we're finding is that an evolution in consciousness and a spiritual evolution, so to speak, is more powerful than a biological one. You know what I mean? At its fundamental core. So that's kind of what I argue for on the show.
Yeah, and this is one of those things that we would very much disagree on, because I have a very different concept of how the evolution of thought works. Mm-hmm. But let's go back to how does jiu-jitsu influence, say, your personal thoughts? So here's an example.
Yeah.
Whenever I started jiu-jitsu, I thought I was good at fighting.
Right.
I thought that was going to be my thing. I had done several years of kung fu and karate. I used to wrestle my brother all the time.
Oh yeah.
We could wrestle for 45 minutes, an hour straight. I was in such good shape. Not anymore, but yeah. But but when I walked into jiu-jitsu, I actually had on my karate belt.
Oh wow.
And this jiu-jitsu instructor was like, yeah, you're gonna need to take that off.
Oh man, poor Spencer.
I was really
no.
How that feels, if you feel like you earned something. I was given this. They recognized my skill level,
karate skill.
And now you're asking me to put that aside.
What belt were you?
I was just a green belt.
Oh, okay.
I don't even know what that meant to us anyways, because they have 8 belts or something, whereas jiu-jitsu has 5. And I think they're even a different order in some cases.
Gotcha.
But I remember actually doing jiu-jitsu and then thinking, I have no idea what is going on.
All I know is I'm tapping.
Well, there was the first roll. Rolling is when you're wrestling, but the first roll I had with someone in jiu-jitsu, I remember I was on top. They put their legs around my neck, and then my vision went out, and I was just, I started tapping out, but I thought there was some sort of accident that happened.
Yeah. That's just how it goes.
and so I was like, it was just an accident. We'll do it again. And I rolled the person again. They put me in the same thing. They put me in, they put me in the triangle choke. And then again, I was still stuck in this thought that it must be an accident.
Yeah.
So we did it a third time. And this time, that time I firmly understood that it was not an accident.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love it.
Triangles don't happen by accident.
No, they
those
don't.
Types of chokes.
That'd be a good t-shirt. Triangles don't happen by accident. Oh man. I love it.
So for me, there's been this wrestling, that when I started doing jiu-jitsu, I started kind of having a different approach to how you deal with things.
Right.
How do you deal with knowledge? This is sometimes you may not know, I didn't know any jiu-jitsu. I didn't know how powerful it was, how useful it was. And so I looked at it before as oh, this is just any other martial art.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think one of the first things that that kind of hit me was comparing Taekwondo to Jiu-Jitsu. I'd done some Taekwondo, and I assume that you've probably had this type of experience before.
A little bit, yeah. It depends.
And like, you know, if someone loves Taekwondo out there, sorry.
Huh.
But, and of course, there's always going to be different teachers. But I remember going into Taekwondo and everything was set. Like, they do this, you do this.
Right.
They do this, you do this. And so they had these techniques that were kind of like everything was pre-planned. And it was being taught, this is what they're going to do in response.
Right.
And I remember thinking, like, this is not very real. And I remember thinking, this is kind of how most people approach information.
Right.
So, but if you were to try to tell one of those Taekwondo people that the martial art was terrible,
they're not going to believe you.
Well, they're not going to believe you, but then they're going to get really angry.
Right.
And because they put a lot of trust in their teacher. Their teacher told them, like, this is going to work. Their teacher, they showed them some videos of when he's fought, and so there's kind of this this delusion that is
mythology.
Created. Kind of. What do you mean by that?
Mythology, like almost develops like a legend around the sensei, around the master, that may or may not be true.
Yeah, for sure.
Sort of thing.
And that's one of the things that was fascinating about the rise of Jiu-Jitsu, is when the Gracie family, who took Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and then essentially evolved it. They updated it, perhaps, or maybe even just some of it was just rediscovering things that used to exist. They went around, they call it the Gracie Challenge. Right, they go around and challenge all of these grandmasters throughout Brazil, and they'd videotape it.
Right,
and there's all these videos online where you can see the stubbornness of these grandmasters, these self-proclaimed experts, or maybe other people call them experts, of decades or even centuries of training. That once it was challenged, they thought, how dare they?
Right.
Like they don't know what we know. Like we've spent so much time in this, and it's like, it's really embarrassing because you see these people that spent their lifetimes believing in something, and they have like lots of good skills, but then like get put to sleep in 15 seconds or 20 seconds.
Right, for sure.
I know like the first, at least probably the second video of Jiu-Jitsu I saw, this Kung Fu master or whatever was going against Hoist Gracie, and he got put to sleep, and then Hoist was just, or was it Hoist? No, it was Hoyler Gracie, I think.
Oh no, gangster.
And he was just toying with him, like playing with a toy.
Yeah.
Against someone who had spent their entire life being called an expert.
Yeah, being perfecting this thing. Yeah, anyone who's listening, you can go check out just search Gracie in action videos. Mm-hmm. That's what they're called, the Gracie in action videos. But yeah, the Gracie Challenge is legendary. And they brought it to the United States too, and they would have people just showing up at their different universities or academies, challenging them, and they got all sorts of videos from all their students would start getting in fights with people too. And they would do dojo storming, and they did all sorts of old school stuff.
Yeah, and it's I think that's a fascinating case study for belief systems.
Yeah.
Because everyone has some sort of belief system. No matter where you grew up, even if it's atheism or something else, it is a sort of type of belief system where you have a construct in how you think. And so everyone naturally has this. It's just part of growing up. And so then what do you do when you're challenged? Like how, it's always one of those, like you see how angry people can become. When I just had like this notification come up on my screen.
Yeah, I got it too.
I lose my train of thought so easy.
Okay.
Where were we?
You were talking about jiu-jitsu as kind of the search for truth, as these different masters were finding out the different comparisons of belief systems.
Yeah. So whenever you have like that challenge of you come across information that could potentially change your thoughts, or at least seems to contradict what you understand or believe, that's when like you'll see people get naturally angry.
Yep.
And I think if we sat and like settle down about it, you'd realize like, well, hey, like, why'd you get that upset that fast?
Yeah, for sure.
But I think it's a sort of defense mechanism, which we see in jiu-jitsu. I mean, I'm sure you have your own stories where you've seen this. But for example, I've seen this quite a few times where you'd have someone come into the gym, first time doing jiu-jitsu, big, strong guy, comes in and is like they have this feeling of that they're already a good fighter and they just want to, to show other people.
Yeah.
Or perhaps they're like, well, I might learn something, I might learn something.
Yeah.
But then they come in and, get beat up by 13-year-olds.
Yeah.
And then you see that person in anger just leave the gym and never come back.
Yep. Or you see the other person in humility start training jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. And that's
I've seen both.
Yeah, for certain.
Plenty of both.
There's a verse in the Bible that like I think speaks to me on that. And talks about like you'll either be humbled or humiliated. I'm never very good at quoting, but it's something like the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Like those that will either be crushed or, man, this is amazing. I'm like a PhD student in Bible exposition. I can't quote verses very well.
That's okay.
It's always been a something I felt terrible about, but I just have a terrible memory.
That's okay, Spencer. I still believe in you. No, I get what you're saying. There's a lot of messages like that in the Bible related to that sort of thing.
But there's like that fine line of which do you fall under?
Yeah.
Of, when this person, they come into jiu-jitsu as the example, are you going to be humiliated or humbled?
Yep. And pride is an interesting thing, because on the one hand, I feel like it is good to take pride in certain things. Like you can take pride in some aspects of who you are. You can take pride in yourself. You can take pride in work you've done. You can take pride in the fact that you're a hard worker or that you have a great, done great things for the world or whatever. You can feel, you can feel pride. Like pride is important. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's very important for everyone to feel pride about what you believe. You can feel proud of your beliefs, you can feel proud about the work you've done to develop your beliefs, or to investigate and develop yourself and all that kind of stuff. You should feel proud about all that kind of stuff. But pride can also be kind of can border or go kind of like it's almost like we got the good pride here. We'll just call that pride on one end. And then on the other end is almost more like arrogance. You know what I mean? And it's like, I think that's a lot of times what we're talking about when we're talking about like the pitfalls of pride, is we're talking about when it kind of blends over to when it's now arrogance. And I've thought a lot about like, what's the difference? What do you think is the difference? When do you cross over?
So I'm going to bring in some Arabic on this one.
Yeah, please.
So in Arabic, the word for large or big is kabir. And if you want to make it like change the form of it, it can become pride. So yakabr. So one's kabir, one's yakabr. And so they have this relationship between making something bigger than it really is. So I think some of it has to do with what is reality, what is real. So if you're having pride in something that is real, like it's like according to the facts.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that we would call good. You're taking pride in something that's good. It's something real. But there's a point where it becomes, in Arabic, it has this reflexive. It has this feeling of you are making it bigger than it is. So I think that side of pride, that's when you're making it to be something that it's not.
I like it. I've studied a little bit of the Bhagavad Gita from the Hindu text, and there's one part about that book that talks about how you don't have a right to the fruits of your labor. You only have a right to the labor itself. And it's kind of trying to advocate this idea of, we don't necessarily have any deservitude or anything or any attachment really, or shouldn't have any attachment really to like the outcomes of your work or what it produces. You should just be in it for the work itself, for the love of doing the thing itself. So in our case, we're doing jiu-jitsu because we love jiu-jitsu. It's not that we are trying to achieve some external goal. The external goal would just be an outcome of the process, but it's the process that we fall in love with. You know what I mean? And I think the same is true for any sort of personal development. You know what I mean? It's like, or biblical studies or reading any old book or studying any scripture or any holy text. It's all about, what are you trying to, you got to fall in love with the process of that. You can't be looking to get some sort of external satisfaction, or else maybe you are verging over into arrogance or whatever that might be.
Yeah. And, I think it's important for me to say that this is one of those things that we would definitely disagree on, but it's one of those that we should always be willing to talk through people's various belief systems. Because if we don't have those conversations, you can't come to truth.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's, if I go back to the jiu-jitsu example, like when the Gracie family is going around doing these challenges, there's definitely a lot of pride that they have.
Oh yeah.
And so of course there's going to be that mixture of at times where they'd build themselves up more than really they were. When like you self-promote yourself to like 9th degree or 10th degree red belt. That's a little pretentious to me.
Yeah.
To promote yourself. But that aside, like they were able to show that it was better. It worked
Right.
better. And so they had, you could say that the Gracie Challenge is kind of like physical conversations where
Yes.
they had these conversations and they were kind of brutal.
Yes.
Nobody wants to be made a fool. And I think that's one of the aspects that's always kind of scary when you get into a debate. Because if we were to debate a topic, there's so that even if you're really confident that you're right, because most of us think that we're right, there's always that I think little fear, like, well, what if I'm made a fool of? And so like there's that aspect that whenever we do rolling, regular jiu-jitsu training, we always recognize that, like, yes, I'm trying to achieve a certain outcome, but there's kind of a bigger outcome or a bigger goal. And a lot of that is what you're talking about, personal development. And you're trying to make friends, right? That's one of the things I like about this particular martial art is it's you can make deeper friends. Okay, so I don't know about you, but whenever I think about people that I've done jiu-jitsu with, if I was like, hey, dude, like, I'm gonna be in your state, near your city, like, that cool if I just stay over? I'm pretty confident that most jiu-jitsu people that have trained together, most of them will be like, yeah, dude, come on over.
Yeah, for sure. Most of the time, for sure. And yeah, it's a really great community, to be honest with you. The jiu-jitsu world is a great place to find kind of a home in this crazy world, for sure. There's a lot of great people that do jiu-jitsu. Although I think that there is sometimes this myth that, like, just because someone trains jiu-jitsu, they're automatically a good person. And I've found that certainly is not true. Sure. There's assholes in every organization and every sort of play, no matter, in every movement, you know what I mean? So, but there are a hell of a lot of people who do jiu-jitsu who are great people, and they seem to be in the overwhelming majority. So yeah, I'm totally with you on that. It's a great spot.
Well, I think one of the reasons for that is, like, if I thought about people I'd done kung fu with or whatever, I don't feel that same connection.
Yeah.
And one of the things that jiu-jitsu does bring to the table is that because every time you go to the mats, every time you train, you basically fail multiple times every training. Yeah. Whenever and this is something Joe Rogan's talked about, it's pretty famous for, is that whenever you tap, you're basically saying, you just killed me. Like, you could have.
Yeah, exactly.
That's that kind of, I think that does something to your psychology when you're entering into something willingly, and also willingly saying, you could have just killed me.
Yep.
And doing this over and over again, I think it does something to you.
It's powerful. I tell people about this. This is one of my favorite things about jiu-jitsu, is the feeling of, there's two feelings. There's the feeling when you're about to be tapped, and you finally let go and you submit. It's a feeling of letting go like no other. It's almost like as if you were about to get eaten by a great white shark and you finally have surrendered to it, and you're like, you just let go and you're like, but there's a little moment there. There's a little second there where you're like, I'm done. Like there's like one there's 1 second there of like, at least for me, maybe I'm just crazy, but at least for me, there's like 1 second there right before the tap, like in between that moment when you realize you have to tap and then you actually tap. There's a moment there that I always feel of like peace as surrender, of like, you know, of like I offer myself as sacrifice, you know, to
I don't have that one as much.
But then on the other hand, when I'm the one in the other corner and I realize that I'm about to get the person, there's another feeling of like kill, like close in. Like that feeling when you finally have someone and you want to make sure that you got the arm bar or you want to make sure you got the choke. There's one moment of like primal aggression of like, you know, that moment of like you got the heel hook sunk in and you're just about to twist and you know he's going to tap and then he actually does. There's a moment of like it's a very primal moment on both ends. That's what I'm getting at. You know what I mean? It's you're very connected to something, you know, so to some warrior, you're very connected to some warrior energy, both of you for like, for just a second, you know, for just a moment where it like gets real and then you release a hug, you know, and it's magical. It's powerful.
What's fascinating is people that haven't gone through that experience. They don't understand how that wrestling, like going through that, somehow makes those people closer.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy.
Like, yeah, it is really like, hey, we almost just killed each other. Like, we're best friends now.
Yeah, it's very bonding.
I mean, we became really good friends. I think pretty much from the start.
Yep. For sure.
You know, we rolled together a couple times, and it's like, hey, let's go to the mall or whatever we did in Germany.
Yeah, exactly. It's great, man. And it's a great way to meet people. It's a great filter for friends. It's a great filter for people, you know, to be like, oh, looking to meet cool people, go to jiu-jitsu class. It's probably going to be a lot of cool people there. You know what I mean?
Well, I think you can tell people's character pretty well, because when you're under a lot of strain, which you could say jiu-jitsu does that. Especially at first, you can tell someone that's like really prideful or has anger problems or I don't know, like lots of different problems I've seen. I remember I when I first started training, I asked this guy why he started training, because like, I don't know, it's just a conversation tool. And he was like, I started training so I could kill my kill my wife's boyfriend.
Whoa.
It's like this guy was trying to take his wife or something, and he's like, yeah, I want to kill him. I was like, oh, I'm just wild. Here for fun.
That's wild.
And so you know, you can see people's like things come out pretty well. I don't think that guy would have told me that on like if we weren't training together.
No.
I probably should have called the cops.
People, it's like therapy. Like therapy a lot of times for people. It's powerful. Yeah, and in terms of like talking about the search for truth and stuff like that, I feel like jiu-jitsu is a great metaphor for that. For the idea that something I believe is that the truth, whatever that is usually right in front of our faces. Is usually like if something is true, you and me should be able to find it here within this conversation, you know, through some means. We should be able to deduce it or realize it or figure it out between us. Or maybe there's some book behind you that would have some insight into the nature of truth, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
That's something I believe. But what I'm getting at is I feel like jiu-jitsu is similar as a metaphor for that, in the sense that there's always a solution in jiu-jitsu. There's always an escape. There's always a counter. There's always some way to get out of a hold. There's always some way to take down the other person. And something that I always think about, like, is whenever I'm pinned and I think I can't possibly get out, I always think like, okay, what would Marcelo Garcia do? Marcelo Garcia is like the Michael Jordan of jiu-jitsu. I'm like, okay, there is a way out of here. If Marcelo Garcia was in my position, I'm sure he would find a way out. So there's a way out somewhere. You know what I mean? I might not be able to find it before this guy taps me, but I always have that, the truth is always there. I always have the answer to tapping your opponent is always right in front of your face. It's always just one or two moves away, just like in chess, and that's kind of, I feel like, a great metaphor for life. That's something I've really taken away from jiu-jitsu, is like the answer you're looking for is probably only one or two steps away. The truth you're looking for is always probably right in front of your face. The simplest answers are the realist, Occam's razor, stuff like that, So I feel like that's for me where jiu-jitsu fits into this kind of conversation of truth, for sure.
Yeah, and I like comparing the concept of rolling, this wrestling with conversations.
Yeah.
And the thing is that when we do jiu-jitsu, when you first start out, it's a little awkward getting into it, and you can almost feel bad for tapping people, or like why did they do that? That hurt, and then you're upset with them. Like, this is something that you can happen when you first start, but then once you get into it, like it just kind of mellows out, and it's just jiu-jitsu. Like, that's just what you do.
Right.
With conversations, though, we generally have a much harder time to enter into conversations with people that think differently than us.
For sure.
And this is one of those things that I kind of hate Facebook and the same types of things for at times, because it's not a good platform for conversation. It's, when you're speaking to someone, there's a lot of emotions that you can sense.
Yeah, for sure.
You can sense when they don't understand what you're saying. And so you can kind of stop and then like try to evaluate or something. But whenever you're, like texting someone, things are much easier to take out of context. But I like conversations, because we're able to, I think, have a better sense of evaluating our thoughts. Even if you're having a Facebook debate with someone, there's still an aspect where you're not able to evaluate each other.
For sure.
You can't, sometimes it's hard to tell, like, are they just angry? Or when you have to face someone and talk with them about something, there's this kind of this reality that you have to come to a certain grip on truth, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Here's just something I've been thinking of off the top of my head that connects with this. Is in scripture, like, often they'll talk about confession. What is confession? And the more traditional Catholic types would see, like, oh, this is a place you go to a certain booth or talk with a certain priest, and then they can absolve you of your sins or something. But my understanding of confession from the scriptures is making something known. And specifically, it means to a person. So there's an interesting passage where it says, confess your sins one to another, that you may be healed. It's like, well, most people, especially of faith, like, well, I just say it to God, and then it's done. I was like, well, that's not what the author of this particular text of scripture thought. They wrote that you have to make it known to another person for that healing to take place. And I think that's somewhat related to this, is that without having conversations, there's no hope for healing.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, put differently, like the way that I would understand those two verses would be that it is possible to forgive yourself and to have that sort of release or that sort of conversation between you and Jesus, or you and God, or you and your inner self, whatever that looks like, and have healing and forgiveness and release abundantly. But if you go and talk to someone about all of that stuff, and then they further the idea of forgiveness with you, and they further give you even more forgiveness because you're telling them some area where you messed up in your life or you feel bad, and then that person is able to hold space for you and say, yes, you are like, you did nothing wrong, you're forgiven, you know, you're clearly are on the right track, et cetera, then yeah, that healing, that release is all the more powerful for sure. But I guess what I'm saying is, the way that I understand the Bible and the message of forgiveness is that we can have forgiveness and healing
for sure.
and release just between you and Jesus, just between you and God, just between you and yourself. But if you share it with others, especially like Jesus says, in groups of 3, I'm there, you know, in groups of 3 or more, that's where you'll find me, basically. It's a paraphrasing, but you get what I'm saying. I paraphrase the Bible too, but you know, so that's what I'm saying is like, yeah, if you have forgiveness in a group, or if you have healing in a group, yeah, it's all the more powerful. That release of whatever you're experiencing is way more powerful. If you came to me and you were like, hey man, here's all the areas I messed up with my wife and I feel bad and I'm trying to work through this, I could hold space and be like, oh man, here's all the ways I messed up with my ex-wife. Here's all the ways I've messed up in my relationships now. It's cool. Like, you know, it's okay. You're doing great. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that is super powerful.
Yeah. Whenever you make something known, especially something that you've struggled with or kept quiet or dealing with, and then you have that in-person real conversation.
Yeah.
You could call it spiritual jiu-jitsu. Maybe that's not the right term, but you have this this coming to grips where things, I think, hit you a little stronger. You know, if sometimes if you're trying to talk with God personally and you're like, I'm sorry I did that. Because you're not able to see face to face, it can be hard to come to grips with how bad it might have been what you just did. But say if you go to that person and like, hey, I'm sorry I spread this false rumor about you or whatever, like, I'm sorry about that. Like seeing them face to face, there's that real, that reality that I think hits stronger.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And anyways, I think that's part of conversation that can help us aim at truth and to come to grips with what with God, what wants for us to understand. And this is like where I want to talk with people and about the Bible as well. I mean, one of the ways I understand the Bible as instruction. So something I haven't known for very long. Whenever you hear about the books of Moses, what do you usually associate those with?
First 5 books of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
They all seem like they were written by different people, though. Just reading them, you know, one at a time, they sound like in a different writer's voice. I get it that they're all attributed to Moses, but I've always thought one of the ways that I've understood this idea of Moses is the historical Moses, and then also the initiated group of priests and rabbis that were founded by Moses and his brother Aaron. Mm-hmm. And the kind of the first temple of the church, in a sense, you know, the first group of the Hebrews. So what I've thought about related to the book of Genesis is it seems more like, you know, conglomeration of perhaps those people who kind of almost like ghostwriters for Moses. You know, that's kind of how I've thought about it before. Perhaps not necessarily Moses himself, although I'm sure he was involved.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this kind of goes down the realm of critical scholarship, and it's kind of it's really a complex subject. That people go into study. But one of the things I was thinking is that when you read the New Testament, usually you'll read, it'll translate it the law of Moses.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the word Torah, and Torah is the Hebrew word for it. But they have very different meanings. So Torah, it has this idea of instruction and guidance. So say like one of the general misunderstandings that people have, and this is kind of Judaism in general, but is always, as with all things, can be confusing between different groups. But a lot of people think that people in the Old Testament, so the Israelites, were saved by keeping the instructions, keeping the Torah, keeping the law. And that if they broke them, then essentially they weren't saved and they have to do the sacrifices to get saved again or something. But the way that, if you understand that most of those are not, a lot of the things in the Torah, a lot of things in the books of Moses aren't just laws. You could think of them more as instructions. So when you do jiu-jitsu, say you had like the master of jiu-jitsu ever, you had Marcelo Garcia, who's like the Einstein of jiu-jitsu. And, if you had him guiding you and teaching you versus like you trying to come up with it yourself, you'd probably be like, I'm going to trust him. Cause when Paul and I, when we met, we were teaching each other. There's like 4 of us blue belts,
something like that.
And so we took turns teaching each other, which was kind of helpful to learn how to teach. Cause I don't think any of us had really done that too much. But there's also an aspect that I didn't feel like we were getting much better faster because we were just trying to like figure things out on our own. And that's one of the things that I use in a conversation piece to be like, hey, one of the reasons that we look at Moses, one of the reasons we look at the Bible is like, this claims to be from God as instruction. So there's this kind of minimal response of saying like, well, should probably check it out. Now everyone is going to go different ways at some point. And I've found it reliable as I trust it as instruction. And I think a lot of times we just misunderstand it. And that's why there's lots of disagreements on, religiously about like, well, what does the Bible say about this? And that's why I've got like 15,000 denominations or something.
Yeah, there's quite a lot. And these days I've read the Bible very differently than I used to when I was a Christian. I was raised as a Christian and I left the church when I was like 17. And then in the recent years, I've found like a much closer connection to Christianity. Well, wouldn't say Christianity, but more like Jesus and the Bible. And I feel like I have a better understanding of it these days now, more than I ever did when I was a Christian. But I certainly wouldn't really call myself a Christian for sure. I don't go to church or anything, but I still read the Bible and pray and do all this, that, the other thing. And, but I just have a really different understanding of the Bible. I read it very differently than you do. And the way that I look at it is more of a idea of it serving as almost a metaphorical story, the whole thing, effectively, of written as a historical document to an extent, for sure. There's a lot of historical truth in there.
Sure.
However, and I believe in the historical characters of the Bible, But overall, the document as a whole is almost like a metaphor, a story of kind of a person's transition from, throughout life spiritually, the kind of the way that your soul moves throughout life from darkness to light. This idea that the books of the Old Testament, that the story of the Old Testament represents kind of the old energy of the world, kind of the darker energies of the world, and then the message of Jesus and the New Testament is kind of a new start, a new story, something that comes to wipe away everything that was in the Old Testament. So in that way, the Old Testament serves more as a documentation of what used to be true, whereas the New Testament is now the new truth, the new covenant, the new understanding with humanity and mankind. And it's this truth that Jesus brings, which I believe is the truth of the kingdom of heaven is within, that we are all one, being. We are all essentially have God within ourselves, that the reason that you love one another or forgive your enemies is because that person is just you living a different life effectively, that you and me are just two people who live a different life, but we're effectively the same. So hence, this idea of living as Jesus lived. And if you really get into how did Jesus live, you find that he spent most of his time questioning the religious authorities, hanging out with people that he wasn't supposed to be hanging out with, forgiving sins, committing heresy, performing miracles in the streets, healing people on the Sabbath, which he wasn't supposed to be doing, and all this stuff. And you look at him, he's a very controversial figure. You know what I mean? And he's bringing this truth. He's bringing this message of the kingdom of heaven is within. The last will become first. The first will become last. That we are all equal. It's a very, I wouldn't go so far as some people who say like Jesus was a communist, but I wouldn't say that. But it's more like,
I have heard that one.
It's a very like power to the people kind of message. It's a very, very radical message for its time. So for me, that represents the new truth, so I wanted to present that as kind of a alternative understanding to the Bible. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah.
Different reading on it for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, this is one of the reasons I like talking with you, because, even if you're wrong about everything or I was wrong about everything, I think it's, this is a good way to at least start the conversation of like, well, hey, what did Jesus mean when he said some of these things? And I think a lot of us believe that he's been misunderstood, but usually we come up with different answers because he's one of the most controversial, probably the most controversial figure of all time.
For sure, he's up there.
But I think this is a good place for us to finish this conversation. And I think we, at least for now, but I think we had talked about picking it up on your podcast.
Yeah, that'd be great, man. Let's do that. That'd be really great.
We can go down whatever road that takes us. But yeah. What do I say?
This has been a really good conversation, man. I appreciate you. I think that we've done a good job here presenting different ways of looking at things. And ultimately, this idea of jiu-jitsu as kind of the vehicle by which we can understand these kind of complex things, whether it's ancient religions or biblical truths or, whatever. It gives you a framework. It gives you a place where you can live like Jesus and see what that actually looks like in life.
Yeah, I think one of maybe the parting word is whenever someone talks about jiu-jitsu, usually simple is not going to be one of the words that's associated with it.
Yeah.
And often we treat faith as simple. And I think there is an aspect of things that should be seen simple, but we also have to come to understand like these can be really complex, and sometimes we oversimplify the issues.
Yeah.
And so the most important thing for us is to search, to question things, to wrestle, to jujitsu truth.
Yes.
And by doing so, only through wrestling information, especially with others, can you come to a better knowledge of the truth.
Yes. And I found, just like in jiu-jitsu, the truth is usually right in front of your face in some form. The answer is usually that I'm the one making it too complicated, or I'm the one who's somehow in the way, but the truth is right there. The way out of katagatame, or the way out of scarf hold, or the way out of the triangle choke is right in front of your face. Marcelo Garcia or Royce Gracie would probably be able to figure it out. But the only reason you can't is because you just haven't put in that amount of discipline or training or whatever. You know what I mean? But it's not that you're a failure. You're there fighting and trying your hardest. It's just that, you are still coming into your realization of the truth. If that
Paul,
makes
sense. Yeah, no. Thank you so much for coming on and talk with me today.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Yeah, I look forward to our conversation.
Oh, yeah. Let's do it again.
All right. Later, man. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation between Paul and I. We will be continuing this conversation within about a week or two, and I'll put that in the notes once that is available. I encourage you to check out Paul's podcast, the Beyond Homo Sapien podcast, which I'll put in the notes as well. Paul and I may disagree a lot, but that's okay. We're here to have a conversation. Sound the Shofar is here to investigate biblical truth.